All right, so this is would be my first episode for Lightspeed Insurance. Anything pertaining to the industry for contractors, our goal is just to make their life easier. A lot of our processes are designed to help streamline their operations. One thing that we do, to give you an example, is we do instant certificates for our clients that they can have user access. So one of the reasons I have Sara on today is we're talking about workers' comp audits. And workers' comp audits is such a big, crucial, important process that happens every year for anyone that has workers' comp. Well, they should have workers' comp. They will have an annual audit. And in that process, this is where Sara comes in. Before we start, I guess maybe if you want to start with telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and what led you to become an auditor.
It's kind of funny. I've been doing audits. I worked for a company by the name of Equifax Commercial Specialist back in the 80s. And it was a branch of Equifax. I was their office manager. And as I began to see what was being done, I took the initiative to ask my boss if I could start trying to do some of the audits. He said, sure, I'll send you out on an audit or two and you can practice and see how it goes. Well, I'm a numbers person anyway. I've always loved math. It's always been my thing, has always been math. And so when I started doing it, I became good at it. That was 34 years ago. Been doing it ever since.
Right.
Have not stopped doing it. I do have an MBA in finance. Okay. So I got that along the way. It was just kind of something to add to my credentials, I guess, if anything else.
I believe on the website, you guys do a wide variety of different types of audits.
Well. We do contractors, we do retailers, wholesalers, aggregate, gravel, sand, you name it. We do workers' comp and general liability, garage liability policies, which are very difficult to do because of preparation things.
How does that work in terms of, for general liability? Is there like a moment where a carrier is like, hey, they're making a lot of sales here, or maybe they suspect that what triggers them to do general liability?
Nothing more. There's just certain companies. I think it's the premium amount that is being charged to the client. I'm not 100% sure, because all I know is we have certain companies that we do general liability audits for, and we do them on an annual basis. Every year they get audited. Every year it's a physical audit, and every year it's got to be done for certain carriers. It just depends.
Okay, so it's typically, if it's a larger premium, there'll just be a little bit more.
It's a bigger book of business, I think, overall.
Yeah.
They don't normally audit smaller contractors for GL, but I've seen some of the bigger general contractors. I just did an audit for one.
Yeah.
That was big. They had like 2 million in subs, and you have to go through their certificates, and you have to, it's just a nightmare if they're not prepared.
Oh yeah. And it's not a simple process, right? I mean, some people, their strong suits are, documentation and processes. And then there's some people that just, collect a cert and they put it on top of their truck and they just let it sit there.
That's exactly right. That's exactly it.
So
the nice thing about workers' comp, though, Mike, honestly, is that we have the ability to look up a certificate of insurance or an exemption for an individual if we have their name or their federal ID number.
Yeah.
And so when I get a workers' comp audit and they don't give me certificates, I can look that up.
Really?
Yeah, on the Florida Department of Financial Services website.
The proof of coverage page, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
So I don't have any problem. If they don't want to send me certificates, that's fine. I just have to take the time to look them up, and I do it fairly quickly because I am used to doing it all the time.
So that's an interesting point, because I've always thought that that could be like a good method, because I remember a while back my client was having an issue saying, I can't get a hold of him, I can't get a hold of him.
Hmm.
And I was in a situation where I was telling the client, I was like, well, in the state website it shows that they
Yeah.
have coverage. So I'm not sure how the audit process in hand works, but you could show them that, and show them that, look, they did have coverage in that time period. So it's good to hear that you do say the same thing, or that you can verify in that way. Can you say that all auditors will have that same open mindset, or some
Well, I
auditors?
don't know if other people do or not. I just am so used to doing it because I went, if you got a little electrical guy that, and anybody that I audit, I tell them when they don't have certificates or they don't have exemptions and they get hit with a $15,000, $30,000 bill and they're just a small guy. I tell them, before you write the first check, you get the certificate of insurance from these people, because you don't want to date the check. I just had one today. Their certificate started on September 23rd and they had like a $15,000 payment on September 12th. And they didn't have a certificate prior to that date because it was a brand new company. So I said, before you write them a check, get a certificate. That's
Yep.
so important.
And I'm so glad that you're saying it too, because one of obviously the point of this is I want my audience to understand that it's not just us, the agents, are telling you this. It's the auditors gonna do the same thing. This is what they're gonna do, and having that process and in place where you're collecting those certificates. I always recommend, hey, just store it in Google Drive, man. Just store it
it's
in
so
your Drive.
simple now compared to the old days.
Even on your email, you can go and
Yep.
click, and you boom, right there,
Star
upload to
it
Google
or
Drive.
have a folder for it or whatever you need to do to have those available. It makes my job so much easier.
Absolutely. And then one thing that we're right now with our client experience department is we're helping our clients with that. Again, I had mentioned to you before we started was our client user access, that you can actually create a user access and issue your own certificates. But part of our client experience is also telling them, like, look, this is what you should do and this is how you should do it, and uploading it into your Google Drive, and showing them little tricks like, hey, look here, you can click this button and it just goes straight to your Google Drive. It's that simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just do this every single time, or teach your employee that, just teach them to press that one button, and it will just simplify your life so much easier. You don't want to have the audit and just run around with your head cut off looking for certs all day. It's just,
Well, you got that, and then you've got people that only get their books done once a year.
yeah.
Their accounting methods are just really behind.
Yeah.
And that makes things difficult. I don't know if you guys are doing that or not, but that's something that needs to be somewhat done in a timely basis.
Yeah, I'm glad you say that, because we do have a third-party company, a good friend of ours, that we were actually in the same industry a long time ago, where we were selling PEO, workers' comp, a while back. And he has his accounting degree, and he has several businesses, and he does the bookkeeping. And that's one thing he always says is just, you got to have the bookkeeping up to date. You just really have to.
When you have to wait, when they say, oh, well, I can send it to you in like 4 weeks. And it's like, why 4 weeks?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough, and that's where the anxiety kicks in, right? Like, if you hear audit, and you're like, oh crap, you don't have no bookkeeping up to date.
Well, and the contractors have to have a profit and loss statement.
Yep.
No matter what kind of construction industry they're in, a profit and loss statement is mandatory for us to get from a contractor, because we use it to do what's called a cost ratio analysis. And what that cost ratio analysis does is it takes their total revenue, it breaks down their materials cost, it breaks down their actual employee wages that work out in the field, and then it breaks down their subcontractors. Those 4 categories have to come up to a certain percentage. If they do not, it indicates there's a problem. If you have a subcontractor that has like a 12% cost analysis ratio, there's a problem. They're not reporting something somewhere, and there's an issue, and that's when we have to ask for a general ledger.
So does that trigger, if that doesn't meet the ratio you're looking for, to request an additional document? Or
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so the general ledger is not something that's mandatory until it's triggered.
Right.
Okay.
So basically, you have a source payroll document, which is the guts of the audit. You've got an employee name, their gross payroll, and then what you want to make sure you include, especially for contractors, is any overtime that they've paid out, because there is the overtime credit of 1/3 of the amount. Okay, you got that. Then on the next one would be any subcontractors, if they use them. Sometimes they don't. Then on the verification, that's the source side. On the verification side, you've got your 941s, which are your quarterly tax reports. You've got the RT6s, which are the state unemployment reports. Those are what we use normally to verify any claims that are on the policy. We look for that. And then lastly, you've got the profit and loss statement. We ask for it on a cash basis because everything else is being done on a cash basis. So we ask for that. And those are the 5 major documents that are involved with an audit. And then, of course, the certificates of insurance, if they have subcontractors and they use them.
Great. Fantastic. Now, when you had mentioned the cash basis, and I recall we had the audit that there's cash ATM withdrawals. There's also digital transfers like Zelle, Cash App, things that are linked to a bank account. What happens in these situations? Is that something they can dispute, or is that just automatic, no dispute?
I discourage people very strongly from doing ATM transactions, from doing Zelle transactions to their buddy in Wyoming that needs groceries for the kids because, the baby's out of milk or whatever, from their business account. If they want to do I don't look at transfers to their personal account. You're looking at checks, cash transactions, those kinds of things. You got to have explanations for those. If you're not putting them in a general ledger account immediately after you do the transaction, like if you take $400 out from an ATM transaction and you put down you bought materials cash because it was cheaper, then I'd take that. I would take that if you put it in there that way, and that's what it was. Most people don't do that. They just take ATM cash out to put in their pocket.
Yeah.
And it's just not a good practice.
It's definitely not. Yeah. That's one thing we always tell our clients is just try to avoid that at all costs. Just because, like you said, the audit will you just can't dispute it.
You on the audit. It literally doubles your premium if you make it a practice. And you can see patterns in financial documents. Yeah. If I have a general ledger and I see you're taking $400 every week on the same day out of an ATM, it looks suspicious.
Yeah, I guess that's going to be hard to dispute that one. Yes. And what would you say is like a common pitfall, like a common occurrence that contractors make that kind of makes you shake your head, or that you wish you could just record yourself and just put it on repeat with contractors?
That one right there with the ATM withdrawals is a great one. Another one is not having the books at all, not having any accounting documents. They end up sending me bank statements for the purpose of their audit because they don't have anything. And I get bank statements and I know their whole life story. I know where they eat. I know what they do at night. I know what they like for food, what grocery store they go to. And I don't care about any of those things. It's just that when you send me your bank statements, every transaction you've made is open for debate. And if you don't have copies of the checks on your bank statement, every single check you wrote is going to be included.
Yeah. That's something
awful.
else.
It's really awful. So the guy you're partnering with is, if he's going to help them get everything in order, then that'll be great.
Yeah, and that's our client, the one that we met through. he's actually helping her,
Yeah.
be more current with everything. Because I think she had the same issue where, her books weren't up to date, and then she got audited, and then she was kind of scrambling around to get everything solved. So, yeah, definitely be prepared. Definitely have some system in place, even if you have to outsource it. I guess the problem with a lot of contractors is that, especially in South Florida, it's all about being competitive, right?
I know it.
They want to compete. So a lot of our contractors are just don't even get the insurance, and they're just avoiding it because they're trying to underbid. Not to mention having undocumented employees.
I know.
How that factors
1099 everybody, and don't go through a payroll, and they don't have anybody on payroll, and the officer is exempt.
Now that you mention it, the 1099s, that's a interesting one, because accountants these days always recommend to pay 1099s. Don't worry, they're independent, it's fine. But from my knowledge and from what I've learned, I don't know the Florida statute by hand, but I've always explained my clients this, and I hope you can elaborate to it and clear it up for the audience. Is there's 4 to 5 things to be considered a true 1099, right? They have to have the registered business. They have to have their own business bank account, their own tools, their own schedule. So I guess from your perspective, how would you explain that to the audience, that they understand just because you pay them a check at 10 doesn't mean they really are a 1099?
1099s for me personally versus a W-2 don't matter for an audit. I record them just like they're getting a paycheck. Okay. From a legal standpoint, as soon as a contractor hires one employee, he's got to get workers' comp insurance. That's what the law says. Okay, now when they issue 1099s, if they ever get audited, or if the IRS ever steps in, or the state of Florida, which is famous for doing this, will audit them and say, how did you have, because all these 1099s are going all over the place if they're documented, and you don't know when they're going to, if a guy files his tax return under his personal name with a 1099 that's written out to him and he files it. We don't have state tax in Florida, so that really wouldn't be an issue. But it's so dangerous to issue 1099s to people as individuals. I would be like, get an LLC, get an exemption, and go about it the right way, and make sure you don't do the things that employee relationship would have versus an independent contractor, because there's a statute. It's 4.0. It's a Florida statute. It's 440.10 or 05 that lists very clearly what an independent contractor is. And these guys don't fit it most of the time. When you tell them to be at work at 8 o'clock in the morning, that's it. That's it. That's it. If you tell them, hey, go pick up that hammer and go nail those boards over there, that's direct supervision, and you've just gotten yourself an employee. Like if an inspector were to walk on a job site, they would get a huge fine.
Oh yeah.
They could shut it down. It would be a nightmare.
And that's the really interesting part, because from an auditor standpoint, like, your guys are just really just trying to charge the right premium for the payroll. Right. And making sure that aligns. But from like a law perspective, if that person gets injured and you're paying him as a 1099, you think he's an independent contractor, you're liable for that employee. He gets hurt, the state for workers' comp is the one that investigates this. They're going to make sure that employee has to be covered, and they're going to find out who's going to owe that money. So it's such a fine line. I get it that most people are trying to save money, on taxes, on payroll taxes, but it's just like, I just thought, man, it's just risk versus reward, man. You're gambling at this point, that nothing occurs and that you don't get caught, to save a few bucks. And again, it goes back to them, trying to save money and trying to be competitive with the rest of them. So it's an unfortunate situation. Makes my job more difficult,
Oh, I can
especially being
imagine.
being in South Florida. Trying to break these old habits. But I guess for me, it's like I guess maybe you can elaborate. Like, what is like the common amount like that they will end up owing? Is it significant, or do you find like majority of your audits you find something that they're going to owe more premium, or like what are the chances out of 10 people, how often will there be good people that are prepared, and how often are they not prepared?
If I had them last year, they're prepared. I would say out of 10 people, just a random sampling, I probably get all the records I need on the first shot. Two out of 10, maybe, if I'm lucky.
And when you say first shot, you mean like their first time
Like
having
the on-site visit is done, all the records are sent. They've got an accountant or a CPA or somebody on staff that knows what they're doing. That's 2 out of 10.
2 out of
On
10.
the contractor side, it's horrible.
Yeah.
I have to make so many follow-up calls and requests, especially for the profit and loss statement.
Yeah.
Because you just, I don't know who you write, what insurance companies you write for, but Guard and National Liability and Fire, I do a lot of audits for.
Okay.
And they're and it doesn't matter whatever workers' comp company you deal with. If it's a construction industry class code, they require, it's a mandatory document, the profit and loss statement. That's the one that gets them every time. They can send you their ADP documents and the 941s and all the great stuff, but if you don't get that profit and loss statement and you can't review it and do a cost ratio analysis, it's dead. It's going to be returned as a non-productive audit.
So that's interesting that you're talking about that, because I've always been curious what happens if they're not complying. What is the resulting end? Obviously they're going to owe a certain amount of premium, but I've heard stories that no, they're just going to charge me X amount of dollars and then non-renew me. Like, how does that process work?
I don't really know, to be honest with you. When I return an audit, a lot of times I'll get it back, and it's amazing to me how many people become extremely cooperative when they get a $60,000 bill for their workers' comp insurance.
Yeah.
They all of a sudden start throwing everything at you, and you don't even have a reopened audit yet. But I've seen audits be reopened 2, 3, 4 times. It's not very often that it goes past the second time, because when they get a bill, and I don't know what that amount is, I can't say I know what the policy is of the carrier, but when they get a bill, normally it's quite a bit higher, I think, than their original estimated amount was.
Okay. All right. So that makes a lot of sense. Let me see here. Is there any like recommendations, like maybe pro tips that you would say? Whether it's obviously we talked about the P&L and bookkeeping, maybe other methods, maybe just being nice to your auditor or something like that.
No, it would be nice if everybody was nice and everybody didn't cancel their appointment. The biggest thing is communication with the auditor, whoever it is. Not hearing from somebody and you call them 3 weeks in a row is a no-no. It's just, it's like communicating with the auditor, letting them know, look, I'm going to be out of the country for the next month. We can then go to the carrier and say, this guy's out of the country. He's not going to be back for a month, and now if we see it too often, then of course it's going to be an issue, but just communicating is important. Returning the phone call, not thinking it's a sales call. I get them all the time too. And when we leave messages for people to call us back.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely. Communication's always key in everything you do, right? It's just you have to have that open line of communication. And when you're in that period, right, where you're chasing them and stuff like that, what is the cutoff point where you're just like, you know what, I tried for 30 days, I have no response. What do you do? Is it 30 days, 60, 30 days?
It's every 7 days we're required to call. Okay, so we put in our first progress report, and it says we called XYZ at this number, and we left a message. And
Okay.
I might even text it. If I get lucky, the text message will go through and they'll know that I'm not just a salesperson calling from a random number.
Yeah.
But we'll call again in 7 days. After the third time, 21 days, at 21 days, we contact the agent of record. Okay. Now, a lot of times that can be ADP. It might not be a agent like you are.
Yeah.
When we call the agent, we give them 7 more days to respond to us or to hear back from the agent. We're at about 28 days. So at the 30-day mark, if we have had no communication whatsoever from the client or the agent, that's when it gets sent back normally. In a perfect world. I might go 10 days sometimes instead of 7, but it's not too much off that.
Yeah. I mean, if they have zero communication, then at that point, it's you're kind of screwed at that point. So the best thing is really just that communicating, even if it's just a text back, call back, just saying, hey, listen, I'm working on the documents. I'm gathering all the information you need. Something as simple as that can go a long way. Obviously the more communication, like would you say for someone that doesn't have it and they're kind of freaking out, is it better for them to be honest as well and just say, look, I'm working on updating all that bookkeeping. It's taking me time. Me and my accountant are doing it. Do you think being transparent helps, or
it does, because I can email and say, this is the situation. We need an extra 30 days. Will you allow it? And most of the times they do.
Yeah.
When somebody is that obviously transparent, we either try to resolve it by figuring out an alternate plan, which normally is bank statements, which I don't like at all. They're so difficult. Yeah. But normally there's an alternate plan, or, like I know from personal experience, if I was given 12 months of bank statements and they were not downloaded from a computerized accounting system, I know from a personal standpoint, it would take probably a week of nonstop doing nothing but that particular client, and it would cost them a bundle of money.
Yeah.
Because it's just really difficult to do that much work for one person on an emergency basis.
Yeah.
So, but I do make exceptions if I feel like if they're genuinely trying to do it and they're genuinely trying to get everything put together, then yeah, definitely I'll work with anybody if they'll work with me.
Obviously we're talking about like QuickBooks or other platforms, but do you highly recommend using these systems? Or
Absolutely.
let's say somebody like myself who doesn't like accounting, understands it to a fair extent. My business partner handles the accounting, and I have some clients that say, oh, I got QuickBooks, I just got it. Would you recommend somebody that is not that savvy with accounting to just, hey, I have QuickBooks here, or just hire a professional?
No, hire a professional. It's much easier, and it's I know that in Southwest Miami, it's a competitive area. I understand that. But if you want to do things the correct way, you have to be up to date with your technology. If you get QuickBooks, then have somebody manage your QuickBooks. I don't care if it's just an online, easy, basic accounting version. You still are going to classify things incorrectly if you're not an accountant. If you don't know what you're doing, you're going to put something is going to go wrong, or you're not going to reconcile your books at the end of each month. So it's just going to be like you're negative $16,000 in your bank account, but you're really not.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
And technology is great. I mean, I love technology, and I grew up in a time when technology didn't exist, and so I learned technology as I went. Yeah. And it's ironic because we used to have reel-to-reel tapes that we used to do input on.
Really?
I did audits manually. I had to write them out on a piece of paper that was like a worksheet. It was awful.
I can't imagine reviewing bank statements and
No,
doing that by paper.
it was horrible. It was so much more difficult than it is now.
Yeah, and especially with AI technology and how it's evolving so quickly, I'm sure like those systems will be so much easier in the future. So I think that's one of the struggles with contractors in particular is not being tech savvy at all.
Yeah.
Some of them don't, like, not being mean to them, but like some of these guys don't know how to use their phones. There's times where I'm like, hey, just do this, go to your emails. I don't know how to do that. So
yeah. I mean, I've gotten photos of stuff, which is extremely difficult from an auditing standpoint. Getting JPEG files are the worst thing in the world to have to do an audit.
Yeah.
And I've had them sent that way because they don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And it's such an easy step. It's just one more step you have to make that it's not complicated. If you think of a file folder and what it looks like, and you think of creating a new one because you just got a new client, you open a new folder and there you put everything.
Yeah. All right. So this is good. I'm very happy that we're taking the time to do this, man, because it's just incredible to me. I must talk about workers' comp audits like at least 10 times a week to clients.
No kidding.
Easily. It's where it's my background has been workers' comp, and it's my strongest suit coming from a PEO market that was for contractors. So it is my strongest suit, and especially in an industry where most agents don't understand insurance for contractors. Insurance in general is very, very difficult.
Oh, I know it.
But for contractors, it's specifically harder just because it's just required for contracts, for bids, for everything. So what I'm creating is just that informative style where, you don't just go to an agency and just buy it because it's cheaper, and there's so many different variables that play into protecting their company, complying with jobs, bids, and also the audit process that can affect their bottom line, right? They come in there and they're bidding for a job, not realizing that the workers' comp policy needs endorsements. They have to pay a higher premium, and then they bid, and then they find out the insurance is going to cost them X amount of dollars, and they didn't factor that into the bid. So I'm always constantly trying to inform them, and it's I wouldn't say it's frustrating. It's more of like, I wish they would just understand the importance of these situations and how it's going to affect them later down the road. And especially in the audit where it's like, I have people, I was explaining to not even a client, a prospect about the audit, and she's like, oh, I'm trying to shop for a cheaper quote. I'm like, well, workers' comp, it just doesn't exist. There is no cheaper option. It's always based on payroll and the work and the rate of what you guys do. And I explained everything, and she's like, well, I think I'm gonna still shop around. I'm like, huh? I was just like, what?
Yeah, you can't get a better rate anywhere for workers' comp.
I was like, I just kept telling her, I'm like, well, I can lower the payroll and you'll have a lower premium.
Right.
But that's the audit's going to confirm that. So I guess like one thing I am curious about, let's say if they have a misclassification and they got approved for like interior carpentry, but they're doing rough framing, like structural work. And an audit confirm that they're actually doing rough work.
I mean, they don't know when they tell us that they do rough work because the interview process that comes out, unless they just lie. If they just lie and say we're only doing interior trim carpentry and baseboards and millwork and we're not really doing any framing or rough work at all, then they're going to get put into 5437. But the problem is if a guy gets hurt because he's up on a roof putting in the deck and they're supposed to be trim carpenters, that's when you're going to have an issue. So it's like you can choose the lower rated class code, but if somebody gets hurt doing a job that they aren't supposed to be on, then you're going to have a problem.
Yeah. Now, what if it is a subcontractor that they're using, has all the documentation and everything? Does that factor into it? Because a lot of times we have companies that do remodel work, and then maybe their guys only do like drywall or something like that, and then they sub out the other work. Does that factor into the audit process as well? Maybe changing the class code because they're more doing remodeling work than really.
It can.
Okay.
They can go from drywall, from like drywall to a carpenter.
Yeah.
If they're in charge, part of the carpentry class code reads that the contractor is in charge of the entire construction project. And that's straight from NCCI or PAS or one of those.
Yeah.
One of the bulletins for the description of the classification. And that's a really fine line that you draw. I had a company that was doing stucco, concrete, and millwork. And they were in 5645, and I did not disagree with it because it's a contractor that does renovations.
Yep.
And I can't fight that. I can't even recommend that 5437 be used in place of it, which is the
lower.
Yeah, it's a lower rated class code, but I just can't. You're not there.
Yeah, I've had many situations where they get quoted on those class codes, and it's like we're trying to inform the client that
that's the wrong code.
Yeah, it's like that's not what exactly you're doing, and I know what the agent's trying to do. There's either two scenarios: they just unaware and they underwrote it incorrectly, or B, they're lying to your benefit to get you in, and then they don't really care what happens. You're in.
Yeah, right.
So it's like at the end of the day, you end up suffering because you have an inexperienced agent working your file, or somebody that's not doing the right thing. So yeah, I run into those situations a lot, and it's alarming for some contractors out there that are doing that, and it sucks because the first year is such pivotal. They're in the process of developing their company, and something so small as an unexpected audit bill can cost them profit.
If it's too much. Now, most of the workers' comp companies that I know that I've seen and had experience with on the bill side of it, they will work with a company that says, look, they just got a $60,000 premium bill. Because let's say they were improperly classified and they were put in the wrong class code, and they were put in drywall when they should have been put in carpentry. And they get a $60,000 bill. They'll work with you.
Yeah.
It's not, again, you got to communicate to them. I cannot pay all of this at once. What can we make arrangements to do? And they'll work with you on it.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because how does that work in terms of the payment plans? Let's say he decides not to pay his audit. What are the repercussions that a carrier can do, or what's most common that they can do?
What I've seen is it goes to collections. It'll go to a collections department. It'll, I think ultimately it'll probably affect the creditworthiness of the business itself. And I don't know if they can get another policy with an outstanding premium on a previous policy. I'm not sure. That's probably more up your alley than it is mine.
Yeah, we've run into situations where they do have an outstanding balance, and I've seen that they've been restricted. But I've also seen the reverse to be true, where they still manage to get a quote and they still manage to bind a policy. So it's like, what's happening? Like, is there like a database or like a way to track it, or I guess it would be like a red flag for a carrier to kind of see like they had a midterm cancellation. You could kind of suspect they have an audit and they failed
it. I think so too.
That's probably where it triggers them to say, well, let me investigate and ask the carrier. Or
I wouldn't want to gamble on somebody like that. personally.
No, absolutely not. Like for me, sometimes what we used to do is we'll collect the quarterly filings from a
Mhm.
client to
Mhm.
verify they actually have an accountant or a payroll in place. But a lot of times, first year clients were just very reluctant, or they just didn't have it, so they couldn't provide it. And then it's just like at the like we're insurance agents, but we're also an operating business, so we have to
Right,
try to win
right, right. You
business.
got to be careful. It's a thin line there.
It's a very thin line, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
it's a challenging industry. It's for me, it's fun. I love talking to contractors, or you know, they're the foundation of the country. You know,
They are. And I mean, I had a contractor last year, we did their audit, and it was the 2 officers. That was all they had. I just redid their audit, and they are growing so fast, and they had all their stuff together for me. They had all their documents ready. Everything was prepared correctly. They had all the COIs. And it was amazing. They jumped from 100,000 to over $1 million in sales in a year, because they were obviously good at what they did.
Yeah.
And I like to see that. So if the first year, and I know it's their first year, I can look on some business, see they just opened. You know, for the first year, I give them a little slack when it comes to, you know, everything being exactly the way it's supposed to be. But I don't keep giving it to them, because I think I'm one of the only physical auditors that works in Miami for this particular company.
Okay. So if you do one audit and you're with the same carrier, most likely you're going to have the same auditor for the following year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Most likely. They try to keep it consistent because it's easier for the auditor, and it's easier for the insured too. They know you already. It's like, hey, you know, I'll shoot them an email. Hey, guess what? It's that time of year. We get to do our audit again, and they'll start getting paperwork together. Give me 3 weeks and I'll be able to see you, and that's it. It's over.
Amazing. Okay, so then it's very important, be nice to your auditors.
Yes,
they
very
will
important to be nice to your auditors.
they'll see you again
Absolutely.
next year for
Yep.
sure. So
Yeah.
when is that notice typically happen on the first year? Is it the 30-day during the renewal process, or is it like 60 days prior?
Normally, when I get the audit, it's already expired. The renewal has already been written. They don't have an audit. They don't have any information on the people. They don't have anything. So when I get the audit, it's already expired.
Okay.
And so when the renewal process takes place, I think it takes place prior to the audit expiration date, but I just don't have any control over when I get it. I just get it when they process it through and assign it.
Okay, so it could fluctuate. Then carriers can, but is it more commonly after the renewal process?
Always after the renewal process. I have never seen an audit come in before it's been after the expiration or before the expiration date.